So I am talking to you this morning about perseverance and persistence. And the text that we're following today comes from Luke 18, 1 through 8. Let me share the words of Luke with you. Then Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. He said, in a certain town there was a judge who neither feared God nor cared what people thought. And there was a widow in that town who kept coming to him with the plea, "Grant me justice against my adversary." For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or care what people think, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually come and attack me." And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?" So, Jesus liked to teach by telling stories. Whenever his disciples would ask a question, he would respond with a story. Now, the gospel writers are a little, how shall I put this, agendaed with their writing. Luke seems to be the gospel writer of the four that likes to stir up just a little bit of mischief with his writing. So Luke is commonly referred to as the social justice gospel writer, because a lot of what Luke writes about is based around the theme of social justice and different privileges and different oppressions that were happening in the first century world. So this parable has some interesting points to it. You have poor versus powerless, which is the woman, versus the judge, who is corrupt and powerful. Now, in the first century world, judges weren't really all about law and order. They were actually folks who could probably be bought by whoever had the most land or the most money in order to get what they wanted. So parables are a special type of story that Jesus used. And these stories have a teaching point to them. And the characters that they use are actually referring to other people besides the character of the story. So this parable makes the assumption that holding a position of power and leadership obligates you to work justly, especially on behalf of the poor and the weak. So in this particular story, how does Jesus use the characters to get his message across? So the woman in this parable is the people that are hearing the story. And they would have been hearing the story because even while Luke was writing the story down, it would have still been very much read to them and been told to them as opposed to them reading it in book form. Now, Luke had a particular soft heart for those that were oppressed. Now, the woman is an interesting character because a female in the first century world would have had no position of authority or status whatsoever. So she certainly wouldn't have been in a position that she could have gone up to a judge and demanded anything. Further, it is thought that this was a widow woman, and so she would have not only not had any position as a female, she also wouldn't have had any position except with the surviving relations of her husband. So the fact that Luke chooses to make a female one of the central characters of his story is a very intentional thing here. Now, this is where it gets a little interesting. The corrupt judge, most people think, most scholars think, is the prayed to person, which in this case would be God. Now, you are probably thinking at this point, Steve's lost his mind. He's comparing God to a corrupt judge. It's an interesting comparison on the surface, but Jesus' point must have been that if persistence pays off with a corrupt human who had very limited powers, even though he didn't think he had limited powers, how much more will it pay off with a just God that has infinite power? So the chief purpose of this must be to encourage Christians to persist in their faith against all odds. It also has a couple of meaning for leaders, though. And we're all leaders. You're leaders at school, you're leaders in your home church, and so it's reminders to us as leaders that the judge's job is to act justly, and he does so only after the persistence of the widow. But he actually does so because God's at work behind that scene, and God is actually causing that action, and he eventually chooses to act justly whether he really wanted to or not. Secondly, civil authorities and leaders served by God's authority and God's blessing, whether they acknowledge that fact or not. So what's the takeaway for our current times on this? I think the takeaway for this is that hope, even in the midst of deeply rooted injustice, hope is there and justice can and will be done. And that through persistence and the prayers of the faithful, that we can bring, through our prayers and actions, justice to our world.